Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Today I've got the Eight of Swords as the obstacle and the Ten of Pentacles coins as the opportunity. And I feel like today's kind of going to be a weird opposite day. So let's get started with the obstacle. This looks like a really the Waite card on the right. I mean, it looks like an obstacle. This doesn't look like a good thing. Getting all tied up with these menacing swords. And then the opportunity. This card certainly looks uh, like something good. It's like a nice, we got society. We got this old guy. Maybe this is like one of the kings or something. This is an accomplished individual of wealth. This looks like an enjoyable retirement, perhaps. Um, and I think today, I think the overall theme today might be that of mistaken, commonly accepted tropes and ideas that have been mistaken to actually have the opposite meaning. So I think this is the case in the cards here, and I think this is a pretty interesting theme in general. To deal with situations in life where maybe you're pursuing the thing that, let's say, society passively sort of implies to you that is the thing you should be pursuing, and then meanwhile it's not really that valuable, and the thing that maybe society tells you is like the bad thing is the thing that is the ideal to be pursued. Um, so to get a little bit more in depth, the eights in general are they symbolize they symbolize perfection in a lot of ways. So looking at this image here, this certainly isn't, perfection isn't the first word that comes to mind, or perfect attainment of a receptive state maybe is a little bit more specific, but that doesn't appear to be the case intuitively with the image on the Waite deck. And as far as the Marseille deck, well, you just got a bunch of these bendy sword thingies. There's certainly an element of symmetry, which could make you think of perfection, but um, yeah, and in a lot of the classical deck interpretations, it's really necessary, I think, to look at each card as it exists within the context of all of its neighboring cards. And there's a lot of meaning that can't just be derived from the single card. You kind of need to look at the whole series. And I think in a lot of ways, Waite was pretty smart to change that and to create these images that just, we get an immediate emotional sense of, like, I get this seems like a peaceful enjoyment, hanging out in the park and watching people pass each other by and exchange pleasantries and hellos, and just feeling like you're in a nice society on a nice sunny day. That's certainly the sort of emotional, empathic impact that this card has on me. And then this one, it seems like, paralysis. And those are both pretty accurate, but one of the things that, the main thing, those interpretations, or yeah, that these images as interpretations fail to do is to cover the the flip side of the meaning of the cards. Most of these cards, in my opinion, describe a situation, and that situation already contains within it its potential for positive and negative interpretations. So, starting with the obstacle, the eight, yeah, it's like this. It's the perfect state. It's the last even number of the series. It's even more self-divisible than the 10. Like in numerology, 8 is considered to be this beautiful number because it breaks down into 4, and then that breaks down into 2, and then those break down into 1. You can't do that with a 10. You get 10, 5, and then you're not dealing with any more integers. You're getting into real numbers. But yeah, so 8 was considered the state of perfection, and it's the second last card in the kind of development of the mind and thoughts. And so it is accurate in the sense that this state of perfect thought or perfectly balanced thought, it can be considered a paralytic state. Um, on one hand, it could represent getting to a point where you have as many as many reasons to do something as you have reasons not to do that thing, and so you're kind of stuck in the middle. And I think the Waite card does a pretty good job at symbolizing this with the figure that is bound, and it's bound particularly in these white bindings, whatever it is. It doesn't look like rope, but the white symbolizes order, and so you got this perfect state of order that ties this person up. Now, I think this might have made a little bit more sense if the figure was also surrounded symmetrically by these swords. If there was four on the left and four on the right. There's, I think, there's other cool opportunities to interpret why that symmetry isn't there, and what the one sword that is closest to us on the ground might imply. Like that might outweigh. There might be more reasons for or against, but if one of the reasons on the losing side is closer to us, quote unquote, more dear to us, then it actually has a much larger impact and throws things off balance or forces things into balance where there otherwise would not be any balance. I certainly think this is a good interpretation on the negative side of this card, and we are doing, this is the obstacle card, but just in terms of some academic background on the cards, this card on its own does not necessarily imply this sort of state of perfect balance as necessarily a bad thing. I think that it could also imply a really a really great meditative state of mental, like either like a flow state or like a Zen absent state where that all the perfected thoughts cancel each other out, and you're just left with some sort of clarity. But in the case of this being an obstacle, I certainly think this is something along the lines of you all your passions, all your motivations, like the real, just deep, basic physical urges, whether it could be like sexual or romantic based, or just activity, going out and doing stuff. Yeah. So yeah, any sort of physical urges. This character on the right is dressed in these red robes. Um, red for wants, red for passion and motion and activity, especially physical activity. And then they can't move. They're tied up with reason, and they're surrounded by all sorts of different ideas. I mean, I like to interpret the the swords. Um, I, I like to factor in the color of the swords, which a lot of people don't do. Sometimes I think people think that if a color seems natural for some object in one of the cards, then it doesn't necessarily have to have colormantic meaning to it. But yeah, I like thinking of the blue swords as being intentional. Yellow is the color of the swords, and it's the color of thought and intellect, and blue is the color of cups and feelings and emotions. And I think that cups in a higher order also represent morality, like the kind of morality that people just, they feel it. Their moral values might be something that they take and then transform and justify and reason, uh, you know, build up or reinforce with reasonable arguments at that point using the intellect. But in terms of psychology in a very generic sense, I personally believe that emotions emotions come first, and then people employ their ability to reason to justify those feelings. Um, and so I think that yeah, I think the blue color is actually pretty apt in terms of what's happening here. Like the swords are, they're forged from emotions and maybe morals and maybe cultural norms. I think those all sort of, the blue also like tends to symbolize spirituality. And I'm not very I'm not very spiritual, at least in the sense that people generally think they mean when they're referring to, you know, a spiritual life or just the idea of the spirit in general. I do think that it symbolizes something that has almost the exact same outcome. Like I believe that regardless of whether you believe in spirituality or not, or some metaphysical realm, I think that um, I think that you believe in things that have an identical effect. So that even if you don't believe in, like I personally don't believe in God or ghosts or magical powers or some force that permeates the universe or any of that kind of stuff. But I do recognize myself believing in things that impact me in the same moral sense. So I don't think there's really any getting away from it. And so again, I think it makes sense that these swords, the warning, the obstacle here would be that the thing that will paralyze you isn't going to just be, you know, some mathematical equations that you're going to be abstractly distracted with and paralyzed with. I think what this is implying is um, it's going to be moral issues. It's going to be cultural, like this. I think this could be a good card for describing what happens to people when they find themselves being preoccupied with culture war, left versus right, uh, kind of just shit talking and outrage outrage inducing media posts about those bad other guys. And yeah, I think often this could sort of spiral out to this like heightened state of reasoning and thinking, but the foundation of which is still moral, whether that person is aware of it or not. And a good question to ask yourself at that point is like, where do your morals come from? Because I think a lot of people think that their morals come from a series of reasoned, uh, like what's that one term? First, it's not first presumptions. Anyway, I think a lot of people believe that first they reason, then their conclusions from their reasoning lead them to develop morals. But yeah, like I was saying earlier, I think it's quite the opposite. So if that paralysis is there, a good thing, a good recommendation that I've adopted into my life that I heard a while ago, I think maybe from Tony Robbins, who was like the life coach. And now I don't think very many people really follow him or anything. But anyway, he was saying how, just as a general rule, but especially if you're feeling depressed or anxious, if you have any sort of mood issues, that going outside and moving around for like a half hour right after you wake up, first thing you do. He was kind of saying like, wake up, put your shoes on, go outside. He was like, don't even brush your teeth, don't do anything, just go and start moving. And he had this line about motion being emotion or something like that. And yeah, I think it absolutely applies. I think you've got much better chances starting the day with movement and then seeing what kind of thoughts and ideas that leads you to. They tend to be much more optimistic, I can promise you that, than starting with thoughts and emotions and feelings and then seeing how that possibly motivates you. Um, but yeah, so if you're if you're this person, the mistake they made probably is they didn't go for a brisk walk when they woke up first thing in the morning. And then opportunity, yeah. So this is another sort of interesting opposite meaning in a way. Um, 10, the 10 is the last stage of the journey of each suit. It's not the a lot of people think it's kind of like the ace, like in cards. Even though in a lot of card games, the ace is also the first card. That's the way I tend to see it. It's like ace, and then the numbers with the the court cards with the pages, queen, king, and knight. Sort of like I think the page is like 2.5. The page is between the 2 and the 3. The queen is between the 4 and the 5. The king is between the 6 and the 7, and then the knight is between the 8 and the 9. And those are all the stages of development within this particular theme that each suit represents, with the coins here being resources, wealth, material goods, even a person's their own physical health, things that a person possesses, family to a certain degree, a person's reputation, their social standing in society, things like that. So yeah, it starts with the ace and it accumulates with the 10, and then this is the end of the road. And both the ace and the 10 exist, in my opinion, outside of the the steps of the evolution that actually pertains to the world, the the human beings that occupy the world, and then it's classically it's often described as heaven. So there's like earth, man, and heaven. I think of I think of heaven as just representing individuals on a larger scale. So it's not so much dealing with an individual human being as it is with the the collective unconscious of mankind. I think it more represents, again, either the something like the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist, the present culture, larger ideas that are so large that if they possess an individual, that individual starts acting as a part of a whole as opposed to as just a singular person. So in a way, they represent the kind of like the dissolving of the individual into something larger. But the ace and the 10 exist outside of that. I think they're very similar to the fool and the world cards, which, if you're familiar with the fool's journey interpretation of the major arcana, yeah, like the fool doesn't have a number. It's a zero, and the world is number 21. And so like the decimal series of two sets of 10 cards fits pretty neatly in between those two, and I think that the world and the fool represent the beginning and the end, but in a way that's a little more abstract than just the first of a series and last of a series. I think that specifically dealing, let's say here with the 10 of pentacles, the 10 of coins, I think this represents the the state of the state of completion of the development of this, and it's the most rigid and organized and ordered um, state of a person's relationship with material goods, with resources, with food, with all those things that I mentioned before. So I think that you know I'm going to interpret this as the opportunity, which here would just be the opportunity would be that you you are in a position to achieve or experience this state of completion. I think this happens with people much more often than they realize. I think most people have some sort of dream or fantasy that they often keep themselves distracted with, that they think is the only thing that they're really aiming for. But I think in fact there's a whole bunch of daily events that people experience that they actually interact with in a very similar way as they do with their main, big achievement fantasy. Like people might think, "Oh, really what I want is I just want to retire. I just want to like own a lot of property and make money from it, and then I could just go hang out in the park and maybe see some friends and go take my dogs for a walk and not worry about work. And sure, granted, that could be a goal or a dream that you think is, you know, a worthy one, and that maybe it's the thing that motivates you to keep doing what you're doing. But I think that on a daily basis, we have all sorts of tiny little journeys that accumulate with the experience of this card. I think any little goal, even something like I'm gonna go to the cafe. I'm gonna get an espresso. It's like getting the espresso. There's a very brief moment where I think an emotional state or mental state that this card I think represents exists, and you have that thing. It's just that as soon as you have that thing, you immediately your mind is immediately free to start thinking about other things that you might want. If you're a smoker, you might be familiar with this. I don't smoke anymore, but when I used to, um, at the point at which I started trying to quit smoking, because before that I wasn't really very conscious of what kind of how I was interacting with smoking cigarettes on an emotional level, on a subconscious level. I wasn't really paying attention to that, but there's something really quite fantastic and profound that happens when you're a smoker trying to quit smoking. When you're not smoking and when you're having withdrawal symptoms, uh, all you could think about is smoking. You're either thinking, uh, I have to resist having that cigarette. I can't have the cigarette, but you're still thinking about it, or then you're starting to think about justifying the cigarette. you know. But there's a really fascinating thing that happens once you have the cigarette. And for me, it's like as soon as I lit up the cigarette, all of a sudden, all of those thoughts of desire and the attempt to control that desire, all of that was gone. And I found myself actually never thinking about smoking or me as a smoker or cigarettes or the money I spent or health. I would never think about any of those things once I was actually smoking a cigarette, because the attainment of that goal essentially freed my mind to do other things. And this is also the case, I think, for, um, I used to, there was a couple of years where I lived in just complete homeless poverty. And I was a smoker at that point in time. And at that point in time, I wasn't trying to quit, but I just couldn't afford cigarettes. And so a large part of my day consisted of just moving around in the world trying to score smokes. I'm like a dumb little teenage kid just going around trying to bump into people that I know on the street, bump smokes off of them, see if I could scrounge up a couple of bucks. There were convenience stores in my area that would, you know, in a hush hush fashion, they would sell singles because I was in a neighborhood that was like pretty sketchy. So it's like the store owners accurately understood that a lot of people in the neighborhood couldn't even afford a whole pack. So it's like you can scrounge up 50 cents or something to get a cigarette. Horrible deal, but c'est la vie, as they say. And yeah, very similar emotional experience. Just absolute focus on this goal that appeared, I think, very much so like this perfect future state of order that I was striving for. And then as soon as I got there and as soon as I had that smoke, the attainment of it would dissolve all of the desire, all of the focus, all of the glamorization of that perfection, that state of perfection. And for a brief couple of minutes, while the withdrawal was satiated, I would find myself just thinking about anything else I wanted to think about. I was free to explore new possibilities. And I think that this is a pretty good analogy, maybe an unconventional one to be sure, but I think it's a pretty good analogy for the tens. It's like once you finally attain the the peak of this particular suit, so you finally have the money, now you can start thinking about other things. So I think there's a progression that's, I don't know, I like it with the suits where you start with swords. Swords transition into cups. Cups transition into pentacles or coins. Coins transition into wands. Wands go back into swords, and you go around and around each. So this stage accumulates with the transition of the beginning of another cycle of the ace through 10, but this time in wands. And I think it might be a coincidence, might be intentional, but I like that having attainment of all the resources might then make you think like, okay, I like what am I gonna do now? And then the next thing on the agenda is probably going to be some sort of action. It's going to be all of a sudden all the potential to move, to act, is at its maximum. So then you're going to start moving through the world potentially with this accumulated wealth, let's say, but at that point the focus shifts from these material possessions, uh, health, family, all of these, building a home, all these kinds of things, and it moves to just your ability to act in the world and how far you can evolve and advance your ability to physically interact, to be passionate, to pursue, relationships, expressing sexual nature and all that kind of stuff, which, I think that's a pretty common thing. You get your paycheck and then you want to go out and party. But yeah, so as an opportunity, this could symbolize the possibility of attaining that thing, like maybe getting that paycheck. But I think I'd rather think of it in terms of this being the opportunity here being the opportunity to move on to that next stage. So maybe if you've been caught up in saving up money for that thing that's maybe a little vague, and then finding yourself redefining your goals. You thought you were going to save up $5,000 so you could start a business, but now that you're at $5,000, maybe you're thinking, well, it actually wouldn't hurt to save up $10,000 before I get started or whatever. Um, it could be pretty difficult to move on from that one direction that you've been heading in. That this card implies you've gotten pretty good at it. If you've gotten all the way to the 10, you've made it through all the little twists and turns. But yeah, but I think this is a card. The danger of this card is a type of stagnation where you stay here, and this amount of accomplishment is really restricting. It's what was it? I think Elon Musk a little while ago in an interview he was talking about why he's been selling off all of his houses and all of his possessions, and his explanation was that wealth was wealth is an attack vector that he just doesn't want to have. And I think that's absolutely true, but not just an attack vector from the outside. Just having a lot of money, just get a lot of responsibilities, a lot of problems. Um, it's pretty difficult to have a lot of money and not be political. At a certain point, just possessing a certain amount of money makes you a political influence in whatever area you're in. So there's a lot of stuff that there are a lot of consequences to being accomplished financially that create a set of rigid boundaries that take away freedom, take away potential. If the aces in each suit symbolize the maximum potential, the maximum injection of energy of a particular theme into a person's life, then this is the other end. This is the calcification and solidifying of all that potential. And yeah, so I think the opportunity here maybe is to make the next step, or certainly to maybe to take some portion of your savings and actually invest it in something. It's something active. It's something that's going to translate to you being able to do things in life, to have experiences other than those related to the accumulation of wealth and resources and securities. But yeah, so that's the obstacle opportunity cards for today. Oh yeah, and sorry for the late post. I've been trying to post these at 6 a.m. so that people can actually have a day's worth of obstacles and opportunities to consider, but I had some really bad caffeine withdrawal, I think, or something. I'm fasting, and so yeah, yesterday, man, I was just not in a good place to look at bright screens. So apologies for that, but I should be back on a regular schedule now. If you enjoyed this reading, bonk the like button, and as always, leaving a comment enters you into a draw for a free one-on-one reading, which will be drawn every Sunday. Thanks for watching and listening, and take care.